the urodynamic equipment. The catheters can be double lumen or single lumen, and only in the pediatric group we use the suprapubic route, or if there is true obstruction in with putting the catheter in, which has happened to all of us in patients with strictures or post-urodynamic or post-radical prostatectomy bladder neck strictures, when this happens. This is very important. I think one of the quality assurance I always insist is you can use both lines. This is the dual lumen line. This is the two separate lines. Normally you piggyback it, but one needs to make sure when the line's in the bladder, then you hold the filling line, withdraw the pressure line, otherwise both of them can come out. But I think this is the critical bit which is down here. The taping of the line is one of the main things, because one of the most distressing things for the patient is we start the test and after a little while the lines come out. Patients are apprehensive, they might not then able to void, they get tense. So it is very important. They're like most things in life, there are no right or wrong answers, but however you want to do it, you should have a fixed way of doing it, do it every time, but make sure that the line is taped very well. What about the rectal lines? You need to make a hole in it. I think if you don't, then when you try to fill the line up, then there is a pressure building up there which can artificially raise the abdominal pressure. And in the females, it can be recorded from vagina. And if somebody has got an AP resection, then that can be, the abdominal pressure can be measured from the colostrum. Next thing is the setting up the transducers. And the way you do that is with this at least three-way tap so that filling can happen. You get all the air bubbles out so that this is what you are looking for, but flat lines, and one need to zero to the atmosphere. Once the lines are in and connected, I think the quality control to make sure both the lines are subtracting well is extremely important. And you can see here is that initially when the patient coughs, they're not zeroed. You flush the rectal line, then they're zeroed, and the zeroing as well. And this is very important. Otherwise, the pressure recording at the end will not be optimal. Now, the reference point is the superior edge of the pubic symphysis. And you can see that if it is not right, then even just with the symphysis pubis, there can be an 8 centimeter difference. Hence, the superior margin of the symphysis pubis is where the transducers should be put in. What are the resting values? And it is important to know what you're talking about. So if the patient is supine, is 5 to 20, sitting is 15 to 40, and standing is 30 to 50. One needs to do a cuff at regular intervals, one every minute, and make sure that both the lines are responding equally well. Filling rate can be so slow, medium, or rapid, can be physiological or non-physiological, but what is accepted is that in the adults, 50 to 60 ml per minute for non-neurogenic, 20 to 40 for neurogenic, and for pediatrics, 10% of the predicted capacity. Hence, it is very important that before one does the urodynamics, one needs to know what the frequency volume chart is. We are most interested in the detrusor pressure, which is defined as the vesical pressure minus the abdominal pressure. Both have to be from the same 0 reference range, and the initial detrusor pressure should be between 0 and 6. And you can see abdominal line, vesical line subtracting well, the detrusor line is near around 0. This is from our unit. I won't say which unit it is not from. So it's a good study. What about the urodynamic interpretation? So we've got two phases, as I said earlier on, a filling phase and a voiding phase. In the filling phase, one is looking for sensations, capacity, compliance, and whether there is any detrusor overactivity. Sensations can be either normal sensations when patient is aware, increasing to a strong desire to void. They can be increased, it can be early and persistent, consistent with detrusor overactivity, or it can be reduced or delayed, which can be in neurogenic patients like quad equina or subsacral spinal cord injury. In the filling phase, you also need to look at the urethra. I said earlier on, it's a balance between the bladder and the urethra. So in the urethra, there should be no leakage. If there is a leak, then one needs to find out whether it's because of overactivity or because of stress incontinence. Some people also believe in urethral relaxation, but leave that discussion to another day. And herein why I'm a proponent of video urodynamics, because if you're doing the video at the same time, you can see the diverticular, neurogenic bladder, reflux, or gross reflux everything going into the bladder, where you can fill in 500 mils and everything goes into the upper tracts. So when we start the study, if there are detrusor overactivity, it does not matter what the amplitude is. Amplitude can be quite low, but as long as it is with the urgency, one describes it as detrusor overactivity, and then it is clinically significant. Compliance is a very important issue which we see all the time, especially in neurogenic patients. So the normal compliance is one is allowed 10 centimeter pressure rise for 400 meters infused, this will be a normal compliance, this will be an abnormal compliance with leakage. But what we are interested in is whether it is true or artifactual rise in compliance. So this is normal, but if this rises up like this, the blue line, then one does not know whether it's true or artifactual, so you need to stop filling. If it falls down, you fill at a slower speed, that means that you've been trying to do the test too fast. This was an artifactual rise of compliance. Whilst in the true rise, once you stop filling, it will stay there. When you start filling, it goes up. So this is a true loss of compliance. And one needs to know this, otherwise you can report it wrongly. What happens in the voiding phase, and that is one can have bladder pressure, urethral relaxation. This is what you want to find out in the voiding phase. And this is a good study of the voiding phase. One can see that the pressure resistance is slightly cut at the end, but this is what you want to see. It is this is when the patient was lying, then the patient was asked to stand up, vesicle and abdominal pressure go up, reasonable cancellation, permission to void. This is the void. Pressure goes up in the vesicle line measured by the detrusor line. This is what you want to see. If you're doing an accompanying video study, then one needs to know when to screen, and this is what you want to find out, whether there was an PVR, if there's stress urinary incontinence, if there's any detrusor overactivity or reflux, and then on the voiding phase, how the void was looking like. Did the bladder neck open? Was there any holdup of the contrast? Are there any strictures? And then in the end, what the post-void volume was. One can also see on the voiding phase, and that needs to be done obliquely, that the bladder neck here is open, passing urine all right. That means that from the balance, probably there is no obstruction in this case. At the end of the voiding study, one needs to know whether it was a representative void or not, and what the post-void volume is. And hence it is imperative that once you do the urodynamic study, one must have the frequency volume chart on hand. So that is what one aspires to do, but like most things in life, things don't turn out as we would like them to turn out. So how to do the troubleshooting, and what are the things which can go wrong? So catheters can fall out, the readings can be unresponsive, the data is not accurate because the zeroing has not been done, or the calibration has not been proper. There can be drifts or artifacts. Urodynamics is one of the things where one must not rely on computers. And there can be other problems, whether you're using liquid or gas, and it has happened to all of us. Then some of the patients might fail as vasovagal. In non-neurogenic patients or in neurogenic patients, one needs to be aware of autonomic dysreflexia in patients who got an injury above the level of T6. So what has happened here? If you're doing live, I'm very interested in asking, but here I think I have to do the question answers myself, at least for the time being. And here it's filling up, and what happened here is that the detrusor pressure certainly goes down. Nothing is happening in the abdominal line. That means the vesicle line has come out. One must not continue with the test. You need to stop, make sure that the line goes back in, and you do the test and finish the test off. What is happening here? And one can see the filling phase was quite all right. It was reasonable subtraction coming up to here. This was end fill. Probably maturation command was given. So you can see the flow rate is quite good. But again, the detrusor pressure has gone negative. And what is the reason for that? You can see again, the vesicle line has fallen out. There's a bit of rise in the abdominal pressure, So it is possible that the patient had obstructive symptoms, try to strain, and this thing happens. Now, it is very important to know why you are doing the study, because if the study was done in a female in which main symptoms were of overactive bladder, and you have demonstrated overactivity, not in this case, one has demonstrated the overactivity, no voiding symptoms, then probably one might accept. But in a man with avoiding symptoms or mixed symptoms, this study must not be accepted. You need to put the line back in, maybe fill up quickly, and do a proper voiding study. This is what I said, one must not rely on computers, because if you look here, because of the artifact, probably the flow meter was being adjusted so that one can capture the flow, and this is an artifactual rise. Generally, when it goes up steeply, it's an artifactual rise. If one relies on computer, this is what you're going to get. The peak flow is 80 mils per second. So if you rely on the computer readings and the computer nomogram, this will come up as not obstructed, because with the 80 mil flow, probably it will not, the PDAC Qmax will be within the normal range. And here you can see that actually the flow is around 10-12 mils per second. With the high pressure, the patient is obstructed. Hence, it is very important to almost completely disregard whatever the computer tells us, at least in urodynamics, and do what actually shows the test. That is why it is very important, and the clinicians rely on either the clinical scientist or whosoever is doing the urodynamics, because it has to be reported there and then. One cannot, like ultrasound scan, go back and they make assumptions from the traces. What is happening here? I told you that most important line is the rectal, is the subtractive detrusor line. You can see there's a lot of overactivity, but is it? Vesical line is completely stable. That means there's a lot of rectal activity. That means the patient had full bowels full or has got irritable bowel. So this is transmitted here. So in this case, you have to disregard what is happening in the detrusor line and go by the vesical line.
Make a suggestion. Can you use your pointer, the mouse, if you're coming out?
Yeah, I thought I was using it. Can you see it?
If you use the computer mouse.
Yeah, I thought I was using it actually.
Okay, that's fine. Carry on.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be finishing, I think, in a few minutes. Yeah. So what is happening here? You can see that the abdominal line and the vesical line are below 0, and the detrusor line actually is well subtracted. And what has happened here, that when you started to do the study, the transducers were at the superior border of the symphysis pubis, but as the patient stood up, they went below that level, and hence this has become negative, and that needs to be sorted. The study still would be all right, but it's not a good study because they should be positive, but the subtraction is quite good. Few last slide. What is happening here? You can see this is uroflowmetry trace. It's abnormally high. Again, if you go on the computer, it will say the maximum flow rate is 45. In actual fact, it's somewhere around 20. What is happening here? You can see that the patient is what we call is as cruising, i.e. the patient is moving his pelvis side to side on the flow meter, and you can get this thing, which is kind of a, this is different to the pinching, or you can say abdominal straining. Here, what the male patient will do is to pinch the urethra, build up the pressure, release it, and you can get this sort of a pattern. And urodynamics is kind of a radiology where you need to know what the pattern recognition is. If you're doing video urodynamic studies, we are all familiar. I'm sure anybody who has done it would have been in this situation where you try to put a catheter in, you think you are in the bladder, start filling up, and actually it is in the vagina. If you don't do this, then the patient will tell you, actually, I'm completely wet, everything is coming out. So this can happen. This is even rarer, and what has happened is that as the line was put in, it went actually up the right ureter. So all the filling is going in the right ureter, and if you haven't got the video, then you will not be able to pick this up. This is very rare, but I've put this in, as we know that in medicine we never use two words, never or always. So, but in conclusion, we need to know what is the right indication to do the urodynamic. We should not have the right equipment, but we should be familiar with our equipment, need to set up to the ICS standards, i.e. 0 to the atmosphere, make sure that the transducer height is at the superior border of the symphysis pubis and do the cuff tests every minute. Troubleshoot as required as we go along, and generally I say that it's a 2-person test so that help is available and we do not do a test which is invasive in a suboptimal fashion. Report there and then according to a standardized protocol on a standardized sheet so that every time you capture all the information. Interpret the traces. Always look at the traces, not the figures, the computer-generated figures. And do not wear your best shoes because quite often they will get wet. These are the recommended readings. And Martin, thank you very much.
Very much. One